Thank you so much, Ansi, for that lovely talk about the drive for perfection and facing the fear of not being perfect, which is a lesson for us all, for sure. And in many ways, Ansi's talk fits well into our next speaker's topic, because he too was brave enough to change direction and face his fears and loves as he did so. Now, bringing maths and art together, whether through mathematical accuracy and perspectival grids, or through analysis of abstract art as fluid dynamics at work, are of great interest to scientists and art historians alike. And our next speaker, Paul Lazenby, will no doubt give us insight into those who've succeeded in mastering both sides of the brain, mathematical and abstract. He came to Trinity in 1961 to read maths before moving to Leeds University to study fluid dynamics. Since then, he's taught maths in a variety of institutions. I'm not sure which is the most fearful, but from schools to a sixth form college, universities and prisons. But he then decided to seize, if you like, his passion for art full-time and to stop doing it in his spare time and to actually devote his life, his time, his career to art. He's a painter, and he credits the abstract expressionist Jackson Pollock, the artist of drip painting, as the most important influence on his creative process. Hence, we have the idea that actually maths and art have married somewhat, I think, in his artistic process, in his inspirations, and in what he's going to recount to us this morning. His talk is called Freedom and Constraints. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
My favourite Picasso quote begins with the words, "Every child is an artist." And so when I was preparing the talk, I just had the horrible thought that I could be talking to an entire marquee full of artists. But talking to people outside reassured me that that wasn't the case. And more than likely, most people here gave up being an artist some years ago. In my case, it happened as a 13-year-old schoolboy when I was just informed that I was dropping art. Later on, the remaining art subjects were kicked into touch, and I went into the sixth form where it was just science, 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 and then up to Trinity to read maths, and it was maths, 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 dot, dot, dot. And then after Trinity, maths, 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 full stop, and then teaching maths for 40 years or so. So that's a period of, well, a fairly long period of artistic constraint, really. But your art education never stops. I mean, how can it when images like the following are keep coming at you? The Emsworth Henry VIII, bound to strike a chord with many people here. Whenever I see that, I hear that gong, and the optimi, omnium, the grace, I always hear that. Art paintings often bring along noises with them. This next one, Picasso's Weeping Woman. She got me via my parents' black and white television years ago. That one made me drive off the A1 when it confronted me. It's The Angel of the North, of course, by Trinity's own Sir Anthony Gormley. This one, perhaps less familiar. I mean, that was painted by my artist daughter, Esther, and she sent me that on my birthday. It came in a parcel with Lazenby's Einstein in it, which was a reference to the famous bronze Epstein's Einstein. But images like these, they might make you go into art galleries, but they don't necessarily make you want to paint. Watching Esther at work did just that. I can see her now as still a student standing her ground in a field of bullocks and producing this hastily produced sketch as one of them came up towards her. And then 5 minutes later, she did it again. Altogether about 5 or 6 of those paintings. I mean, if nothing else, that was a fascinating example of art meeting fear. So, the artist bit of me, I think, the acorn, if you like, the artist bit of me that Picasso, I guess, had in mind when he was talking, was being woken up. But I didn't do anything about it until about 1996, I think, when my teaching workload was reduced somewhat. And I decided to join art classes, portrait painting, and then life drawing. I'm still a very keen life drawer. I still get a weekly fix of that. But then this culminated in doing a full-time course in fine art. The course was just what I wanted. It gave me, amongst other things, complete freedom to experiment with both with paints and painting techniques. I discovered that paints appear to have wills of their own. Sometimes they were really difficult to work with. At other times they would be cooperative and place their beautiful properties at my disposal. I particularly liked it when they moved, such as when a delicious trail of paint would meander down the surface of a painting and perhaps encounter a barely wet area of paint. This interest in the motion of paint took me naturally to the work of this man, Jackson Pollock, Jack the Dripper, as they call him. There he is with his inevitable cigarette. That's one of the most flattering portraits I could find of him. And there's one of his paintings. That painting he called number 1 because it was in the middle of a series of paintings. And no, he didn't like titles, but it's a big painting. I think it's about 2.5 by 1.5 meters, something like that. 8 feet by 5 feet for the older people. And I'm fascinated by that on so many levels. I mean, first of all, it's an awesome painting. I can see, I don't know whether you can see this, but I can see a real feeling of 3 dimensions in that. Yes, you're all looking. For some reason, I find I can see it better by closing one eye. But I don't understand that, how I can see a 3-dimensional thing with one eye. But anyway, most people tell me that there's something the matter with me, but I don't know. Anyway, that's Jackson Pollock. And I remember spending one whole afternoon trying to reproduce those elegant, thin trails. And I discovered, after a lot of messing about, that I could do it with using acrylic paint, getting a stick, dipping it in the paint and throwing it like that, or splatting it. A backhand came later. But I got the trails. There was paint all over the place. I got the trails, and there was the beginnings of the 3-dimensional illusion of 3-dimensional space that Pollock's noted for. Right, well, at the end of my course, I set up a small studio at home. I knew inside what I was going to do, but some awkward person asked me to write an artist statement, and so this is I did the best I could to put this into words. Right, well, that's the theory. Let's have a look at the practice. So that's a painting I did early on when I was using mainly acrylic paint. It's sort of Essence of Autumn, I think. I think I used the imaginative title Autumn for that. You can see there's a sort of pollock splat at the top right. That's very rough, but it's essence of tree. And although I'm sort of constraining the medium there, it's cooperated with me and produced some leaves as well that I was very grateful for. No paintbrush touched that. If I wanted to merge the paint, I did it with my hands, rubbing it into the canvas, which is on a board, so that I can be rough with it to try and get a glow. The green at the bottom, that's a nice pollock mark. I was pleased with that, vegetation type green. And then I wanted a few berries, so I used not acrylic paint, I used enamel paint to just dribble it. You might think that's dead easy. You try it, getting a series of little dots. There was a bit of heavy constraint, I have to say. It wasn't languid like that. It was definitely splat, which worked fine for the tree. But I don't know if you can see, there's a little trail at the bottom right-hand corner that looks like an arrow. I think that was not very happy about the whole thing. So we'll move on to the next painting. That entirely different medium, painting about this by that, square format. Incidentally, when I do the splatting, the painting has to be horizontal, otherwise it would then run all over the place. For that, which I used in the title page, I used enamel paint, running it thinly to create the background, and then sort of dabbing a bit to get darker bits of sort of undersea stuff. And then, if you can probably see, I haven't got a pointer, but I can tell you where it is. On the left-hand side, I think you can see some trails. The trails have been formed by pouring white spirit that etched its way through the painting. Then I turned the paint on its side so that it can run in that direction. You can see where I've run my finger perhaps through to generate some highlights. And then the rest, the pollock trails, are using Hammerite paint, which you can buy in DIY stores, but it runs like a dream. It loves it. Oh, yes, no splatting necessary there. The only thing is that you get so carried away that you can cover the thing entirely with it if you're not careful. But I felt I'd got a nice, sort of undersea feel to it. You can almost expect Das Boot to come through there any minute. Now the next one is a little bit bigger. That's a mixture of acrylic paints and enamel paints. There's a lot going on there. I start off with red and yellow enamel paints, diluted, running down the picture plane. I then use the sort of bluey, purpley paint, also acrylic paints, and I let that dribble down and then turn the canvas on its side. It's canvas on board, dribbles across, so I get that crisscross period. Just to the right of centre, there's a light bit. I got that by spraying water and allow that to run down deliciously. And then you can see the pollock marks, for which I don't use acrylic anymore. I use enamel, and there they are, glistening away. It's beautiful paint, is enamel. It looks as beautiful as when you put it on. Terrific paint. Now then, that's a much more abstract painting, and I've left you to be making what you can of it. I had in my mind the sort of echoey space of a cathedral when I was looking at that, with a bit of stained glass in the background, and the pollock marks there were to give a feeling of space. Before I leave that painting, That's the same painting rotated through 90 degrees. It's not a cathedral anymore. It's much more landscapey now. Your brain's trying to make something of that, and it just reinforces, I think, that Gombrich said, you do not see with your eyes, you see with your brain. So your brain's trying to make something of that. Good luck to you. Finally, this last painting began life like that. That's four by 2 feet panels bolted together. That's the back view. Why bolted together? Well, you try putting one that big in your car. I have to unbolt it to transportation purposes. Right, there it is, turned the other way up. It's canvassed and primed, ready to go. What's the green? That's my lawn. I'm outside. I need to get out of my studio often because some of these paints, the fumes are dreadful. They are actually dangerous in some cases, so I try and get out if I can. It's a lovely day, by the way, when I'm doing this. What I'm going to do with that, I've obviously thought about all this beforehand, but I'm going to cover it with blue aquamarine paint, acrylic paint, let it run this way and that by tipping it. Okay, I've got that. Wow, rectangles. Well, what I've done there is I've got those rectangles by pouring paint and then wiping off bits to give nice sharp edges. Now, what is the point of the rectangles? Well, what I did was I cut bits of cardboard to fit exactly over the rectangles. Why did I do this? Well, what I was going to do was to put trails that went, some of them in front of the rectangles and some behind. So you're thinking, how do I get one behind? Well, I put a cardboard blank over the rectangle, get a trail to go over it, and then if I remove the cardboard, hey presto, it's gone behind. Right, now, just to give you some context, this is Saturday morning when I'm starting this. The painting has to be on the wall of an exhibition by Wednesday. So, talk about, well, anxiety anyway. There's certainly anxiety there. I'm using 4 colours. I'm going to use red, black, light blue, dark blue. Now, there might be people who think that's a bit of a harebrained scheme that I've got there. If you think that, you are absolutely right, because when I started throwing, everything went wrong. I won't go into the details, they're too upsetting even now to talk about. But I kept the paint was telling me, no, this is no good. And, oh no, I'll keep going, it'll come right. And then I realised, no, stop, it's a terrible mess. Then I thought, wow, I've got to get it off quick, because if it dries, and it was a really nice day, if it dries, it'll eat into the background. Background ruined. Exhibition Wednesday. Fear. Right. I spent 3 hours with a scraper and white spirit hacking away, and eventually, by some miracle, I got back to there. I was panicking that night. Next morning, Sunday that was, I thought, the rectangles have got to go. They were interfering with the flow. You can't have this beautiful flow, this give and take that Pollock used to talk about when you're messing about with little bits of cardboard and so on. How could I introduce such a stupid constraint? Right, so the rectangles had got to go. Right, I poured them out of the way with lots of acrylic paint. Then think the rest of Sunday. Plan. Unbolt it, put it away, get it out in the morning, bolt it together. Right, it's now or never, 9 o'clock Monday. Oops, sorry, I've gone too far ahead. 9 o'clock Monday, I start throwing the same paints. I'm just going to rely on the paints to do the business for me. Let it happen. And that beautiful state came up, I swear, it wasn't me, it was the paint. It was, I can't really describe it. It was just a wonderful feeling. Again, Pollock calls it give and take. And then after an hour, it was all finished. And wow, I felt sort of really moved and relief, really. I felt absolutely terrific until it started raining. And, and then I had to recruit neighbours to carry it in horizontally, like as if it was a spinal injury, and lay it down on the floor of my garage. And then it was pray all Tuesday, pray that it dries all right and skins over enough so that I could unbolt it. And I took it in to the exhibition position, bolted it on the wall using 8 mirror plates. I'll leave you to think about it as to how I managed to do that. And then, and only then, did I really see what it looked like, because you can't see what a painting looks like on the floor. It's impossible. And this is what it looked like. There we are. So, wow, I thought, oh, does it look beautiful? Well, does it look beautiful? You can see, though, on the left, the paints are beautiful. They did me proud there. There's a lovely backhand one there. I mean, it does record your gestures, which I do like. You can see a few residual rectangles there if you look, but I don't think most people will notice those. So is there a space? Yes, I reckon I could swim through that there in the just left of centre. So the paints did me proud there. So that's 8 foot by 4 foot. So that lasted about a minute, that period of exhilaration. And then, as always happens, when you've laid yourself on the line, you've put that out, this is me, this is my work, you are then vulnerable. And you know what follows vulnerability? Fear. And it's a very real fear. Suddenly the painting, you have doubts about the painting, you look at other people putting their work up, nobody's looking at yours. Oh, perhaps it's not as good as I thought it was. Oh dear, the old fear of what people might say. I mean, people are unbelievably cruel sometimes when they talk to you about your painting. My 3-year-old child could do better than that. So you've all these fears, but underneath, those fears of being perceived as having failed, and then under that there is the feeling that in fact that perception is correct. I mean, we've all suffered fears of failure. So all these negative feelings piled up, fear of rejection, and revisiting old bits of suffering that you've had. So I thought, no, let's not be too negative. At least I've given some paint a dose of freedom. So it's not entirely negative. And then one last fearful thought came to me. What would his reaction have been? Thank you.